Hi and welcome to this Higher Art and Design exam tips video. I'm Miss Avie and please come and ask me any questions if you would like to follow up on watching this while you're doing your revision. So if you don't know already, the paper is out of 60 marks and you have a whole 2 hours to answer your exam questions. The paper is split up into 2 sections. Section 1, where you have to answer question 1 and 2 other questions. And then you've got section 2, where you have to answer question 7 and 2 other questions. Section 1 is all about your expressive studied artist and expressive works, and section 2 is all about your studied designer and design works. Please ensure that you do your revision for question 1 and 7 prior to the exam, as those are the parts that you can really study for. When it comes to splitting up your time in the exam, you have 2 whole hours. However, in each section, you are required to try and answer 3 questions. So in the 2 hours, what I would try and do is keep an eye on your time and break it up to answering each question within 20 minutes. This will then just allow you the time to go through each one carefully and evenly. There's nothing worse than spending too long on question 1, for example, and then running out of time on your 2 unseen questions. So please bear that in mind when you're doing some practices at home. In your section 1, you will be discussing your expressive artist studies. This is where you will discuss your studied artist and an artwork that they have created. Please ensure you know the name of your artist and the artwork and the date that it has been created, which you will have been taught to you by your teacher. Now, what's really important about question 1 is that you will be given 3 different bullet points to reference and explain. The third bullet point, impact of social, cultural and other influences, will come up in every single paper. So it's really important that you memorise and learn that information about your studied artwork and artist, as that can guarantee you 4 marks from the start. The other 2 points above, the prompts, for example, here are scale, and the second one is a choice of visual element. It is essential for question 1 that you look at all the studied artist notes you have been given by your teacher to make sure you are getting your best possible mark out of 10 on this part. So making sure that you understand what prompt you're being asked about and understanding what you need to write. Please make sure you always use the format of your point, your evidence and your explanation when you are writing your answers for question 1 and throughout the paper, as this will make it very clear to the marker to understand what you are writing. In section 1, you will then have the option to attempt 2 unseen questions from questions 2 to 6. This will be a range of images or of paintings, artworks and some sculptures. The artworks often use a self-portrait or a portrait, sometimes a still life, often a landscape, and then a 3-dimensional sculpture, which we will see below. So this is the first image that we've got on this past paper. This is obviously a woman sitting in a chair. It's called Young Sister, and we have the details of that listed below. What's really important when you're looking at the unseens is to consider the title, when the painting or the artwork was created, and what material it was created with. You will then be asked to comment on 3 prompts. These can range from colour to composition to line, pose, setting, which you should all be very familiar with. Make sure that you're picking questions that you feel confident answering and responding to the prompts. For example, if you don't feel confident talking about setting or subject matter, maybe you're better choosing a different artwork. But really consider the prompts as well as the picture that you're seeing in front of you. That's our first kind of unseen question in this paper. The next one, you are given more of a still life painting. Again, we have the title along with the material and the size. and we are given our 3 prompts that we're asked to comment on, so composition, subject matter and tone. Beneath this we now have a sculpture, again with the title, what it's been created with and the size. You'll quite often have 1 or 2 pictures along with the sculpture just to kind of show you the scale of it and where it might be situated. You will often be asked, again on your 3 prompts, for example in this one, form, location and scale. Please do not answer a sculpture question if you have not been practicing them in class, because the vocabulary might be slightly different to when you've been analysing artworks. So please avoid a sculpture question if you've not been practicing them. We then have a picture which is a landscape painting, again with the title, and this also tells us the date, which is a long time ago, so that's to be considered when maybe you're talking about the materials that have been used or in any of your analysis. Here you're asked on mood and atmosphere, perspective and subject matter, and again it's always just making sure you're responding to the correct prompts and thinking that you're giving a good point, evidence and explanation for each of these. And then finally, our 6th picture that we have here is a print, a lino cut print on paper, so something a little bit different to the previous expressive arts works we've seen. Again, the prompts are different in this one, pattern, setting and techniques, and again worth 10 marks. I am going to do an example answer of how I would answer this unseen question in this higher paper. So I know that my prompts are colour, line and pose, and I have 10 marks to get. My ideal thing to do is making sure I'm putting enough points down so that I can score 10 out of 10. So ideally I'd be going for 4 points on colour, 4 on line and maybe 2 on pose, because I think pose is the more difficult one. You can split up your points however you want. However, the maximum points you can be awarded for a prompt is 4, so there is no point in doing any more than 4 for your prompt. So, in this painting, it's called Young Sister and was created in 2022, and I know that it's acrylic paint on linen. My first prompt that I have been asked about is colour. Now, what's really, really important when it comes to talking about the prompts is making sure you're making it very clear which prompt you're discussing in your answer, and please try to make your answers follow the format of point, evidence and explain, which I'm sure you will have been doing with your teacher in class. So my first point I'm going to make on colour in this picture is that the artist has used a range of harmonious browns throughout the painting. We see this particularly in the natural wooden floor and the tone of the woman's skin. The warm wooden floor conveys a welcoming atmosphere within the scene. That would be my first point on colour. My second point on colour would be that the grey coloured book on the coffee table, although it's noticeable, it does not stand out, and this suggests that it's not as important as the woman or as the blue saucer which we see in the painting, as they stand out more. We see a few uses of the colour blue throughout the painting, in the saucer, the edge of the table, the woman's shoes, and a little part on her chair. This really helps direct the viewer's focus towards the woman as these work horizontally and upwards towards her face and hands. My last point on colour is that the white clothing on the woman creates a very bold contrast against the black jacket and dark coloured chair. This is making the woman the focus point, the vocal point, and the main thing that we are drawn to. Now, those are 4 points on colour. However, if you had any other valid point, as long as it's fully justified, explained where you're seeing that, and then explained where you're seeing it and explaining what the impact of that is, then you would get a full mark for colour. So that's some points on colour. We're going to move on to our next prompt, which is line. Line will often come up in pictures that involve a lot of line. This one is very, very good for that, as we can see it in the floorboards, in the chairs, in the windows, and in the clothing as well. So there's lots of different things to discuss, and that's what's really important when it comes to these prompts, is making sure that you're discussing not necessarily the picture or artwork as a whole, but different areas in particularly. So the first thing I would say is that there is repeated lines which are used to indicate the wooden floorboards on the lines, which get closer towards the background. Now, this adds a sense of perspective and it gives a sense of depth to the artwork. Secondly, we see flowing lines on the woman's clothing, and this indicates form. It adds a sense of kind of 3-dimension, and it gives a kind of stylistic look, which contrasts quite nicely with the angular furniture surrounding her. Next, the artist has used white diagonal lines on the window panes in the top right of the image, and this indicates that there's light shining on the glass or reflecting on the glass, again emphasising kind of the setting that she is sitting in, which looks like maybe a cafe or something similar. And lastly, there's a few pale lines on the floor, underneath the chair, underneath the table, again giving a sense of light streaming into the room. These diagonal lines also point towards the woman, the subject, and this enhances her importance. So those are things that I have said about line and where you see them. Again, if you commented or wanted to comment on any other feature including line, it might have been detailed line, as long as you're explaining why that kind of has an impact, then you would get a mark as well. So anything else that is valid and fully justified. And lastly, we have the prompt here on pose. Pose tends to throw people a little bit. However, pose will only come up if it is an artwork involving a person, okay? And it is about the way they are positioned, how they are sat, so you can sometimes think about how has this been composed. So I would suggest that the woman is drinking coffee in quite a casual pose, as she's sitting with her foot up on the seat and an arm against the chair, which suggests that she's really, really comfortable. Her pose is giving us the indication that she's quite comfortable and very relaxed. The woman has got her full coffee cup raised to her mouth and is looking towards the cup. This is suggesting that she's about to take a sip, or she's maybe blowing on her coffee to cool it down. So you could even say, what are they specifically doing and why is that being indicated to you by the artist? Both of her hands are holding the cup of coffee, again showing that she's quite focused in the activity. And it's enhanced by her book being open on the table. So it looks like she's kind of in a focused area, reading her book, sipping her coffee, suggesting that she's in an uninterrupted kind of area where she's trying to get some focus. There appears to be nobody else around, and the relaxed body language of the woman suggests that she's sitting in quite an empty environment. She may not be sitting like this if the room was full. So the pose again is kind of emphasising that she's maybe relaxed, very comfortable, and isn't surrounded by any other people. Again, as long as you're backing up any point you make on the prompt, this one being pose, and you justify your answer, you would get a point. So I've just listed 4 points for each of these prompts beneath, so that would take me up to a total of 12. However, it's out of 10. Sometimes just adding an extra point or 2 is very beneficial in case you have something weaker. But that is how to answer those sorts of questions. And the most important thing is making sure that you're giving your point, where you're seeing your evidence, and then explaining where that is. Section 2 is all about your design studies. Now, very similarly to section 1, you are going to have to answer question 7, which is this one on the screen, followed by 2 unseen design questions. For question 7, which is this one here, you will have studied a designer with your class teacher. You will have been told about lots of visual elements that we might involved in that design. You will have been taught about the target audience. You will have been taught about the target market. You will also have been taught about the function, and you will also have been taught the different influences that have been made on this designer. What you will always be asked in question 7 is the impact of social, cultural and other influences. Now, this comes up in every single paper, every single year as part of question 7. So I would advise that you know 4 points about the influences on your designer, as that can guarantee you 4 out of 10 on this question. The other 2 prompts above vary from paper to paper. However, you want to make sure that you have revised them to the best possibility that you can, so that you have as much knowledge as possible going into your paper. Please make sure, similarly to section 1, that you are answering this question with your point, your evidence and your explanation. Again, in section 2, similarly to section 1, you will have to attempt 2 questions from questions 8 to 12, and these will be a variety of designs. As you can see, as I flick through these next pages, you can see the variety of designs that you might be asked about. This first one is a kind of jewellery design, which is a big wooden collar. So if you have studied jewellery or anything like that previously, this is quite a good option for you, as you will be very familiar maybe with some of the vocabulary. There is always a graphic design as well. So for example, here we have a poster. Again, if you have been studying a poster design in class, this is quite a good option to go for, as again, you will be very familiar with the vocabulary that you might use. The option of a costume will also be there. We have a theatre costume here. If you feel confident answering this question, you absolutely can choose it for one of your options. Just make sure you are feeling quite confident with the prompts that are asked of you in the question. There will always be an architectural design in this half of the paper as well. If you have not been studying this, I would advise that you stay away from it, as the vocabulary can be slightly different and you might not be used to answering this sort of question, but there always will be an architectural question involved in this half of the paper. And finally, there will always be a product design. If you have been studying these and practicing them with your teacher, obviously you might feel very confident in answering and responding to the prompts. However, if you do not, please make sure you do not answer a product design question. Okay, so you have multiple choices of what to do. If you've been studying graphic design, I would go for the poster. If you have previously studied jewellery design or fashion design, you might go for the jewellery design, or you might go for the costume. So please make sure you're looking at the pictures pretty closely and making sure you're looking at those prompts as well when you make your decision. I'm going to do an example answer of how I would answer this question, and also an example of how I would answer this question here. For this question, which is the kind of jewellery based design in this paper, we are looking at a wearable structure, which we can see has been made from wood, string, nails and glue. Now, the materials are always listed below with a design like this, so please make sure that you are reading this so that you don't make any kind of false assumptions of what the material is being used. You're always asked about your 3 prompts. In this case, we have fitness for purpose, form and materials. This is not your kind of typical jewellery piece. Sometimes they're a bit more traditional, but this one we've got some quite interesting materials to be considering. So the first prompt we're being asked about is fitness for purpose. So I would say, firstly, that this design could only really be worn for a limited amount of time, because the large wooden form is built off the shoulder and down the back, resulting in quite a restricted movement for the wearer. So it's not being worn for long periods. The second thing that I would say about its fitness for purpose is it's quite sculptural with its style, and it's quite impractical. It's got lots of layers of wood, and the wood could actually be quite heavy to wear. So I believe that the design would be best suited for being put on display or a catwalk, rather being worn for long periods of time. The large battens of wood that hold the main sculpture form in place over the shoulders are very, very large in scale. Now, this is useful because it does prevent this slipping off the wearer's shoulders. However, it is again probably quite heavy to be worn, but for wearing it and for the purpose of fitting on somebody, it does kind of allow the weight to be distributed evenly. The rigid strips of wood that go over the shoulders, if we look quite closely at the image, appear like they may be adjustable. Not be adjustable, sorry. So it would be quite difficult to take on and off. Sometimes you can look at an image and you can see that there's maybe a strap or a button or a hinge. In this one, we don't really see that here. So it looks like it would be very, very difficult for this person to get on and off of their body. So it's not really fit for the purpose. The second prompt that we have been asked about is form. So form is about kind of the dimension of this piece. So what kind of form has been created? Now, what we have got is quite a lot of jagged geometric forms which overlap throughout the piece, and they're clustered together, which create quite a lot of depth, but they also create a lot of visual impact. So the form is very kind of visually stimulating for somebody who's looking at it. There is lots of triangular shapes that are joined to create these little forms, and the structure kind of gives a skeleton appearance to the design. It's almost as if this is the base of something. We've got varying scales in the wood, some larger triangle areas, smaller triangular areas, which give this kind of geometric form, and they create quite an interesting design which connects and flows in unity because of these different forms. The wooden structures are built off of the body, almost resembling a ruffled collar, which we kind of get from the name. But this is representing the form of something a bit more traditional, however, in very, very different wooden materials than what it traditionally would be designed in. The layered forms also have more weight on one side of this woman. On the right-hand side, we can see there's a more cluster of these kind of shapes that have been built up than on the left-hand side. This makes it an asymmetrical and unbalanced design. Again, that is adding kind of to the form of the design. And lastly, we have been asked about materials. Now, obviously, beneath the picture, we can see that the materials are wood, string, nails, and glue. If you just tell the marker that that's what it's made of, that's fantastic, but you need to explain what kind of impact these materials might have. So these materials that have been listed are quite inexpensive, and they're very available. You could buy them in a lot of different places. So that would mean that it would be quite cheap to probably create, and also then appeal to more people because it's affordable to buy. These materials are not really expensive, making it available to a wider target market. We know that the design is held together by string, nails, and glue, and this will help to maintain 3D shapes and also add structure and kind of will strengthen the design overall. The bare wood and the jagged forms create quite a natural appearance and style, which makes it look more like a prototype or a mock than an actual finished design. It looks kind of as if it's just getting started or as a mock-up. The construction of the forms in varying lengths of wood has resulted in the sides and corners not meeting, so some of the areas appear quite untidy when we look at it closely. It's really important when you're doing these questions to look at the image very, very closely, taking your time to observe lots of different aspects. So that is 4 points for each of those prompts there. Again, what I would do is make sure that you are putting 4 points down for the prompt you feel most confident with, and then it means you've got 3 points for the remaining 2 prompts. As long as you justify each point that you make in your analysis, you will get a point. The second example answer I'm going to do is on a poster design for this one here, which is for Olympus Mons poster design created in 2015. So we clearly have our poster here. What's quite nice about this question is that it's got a little bit of area of kind of detail, which we can see zoomed in, which is really important for when we are analysing this piece. As always, the 3 prompts that we are being asked to discuss are listed below. In this case, it is colour, imagery, and layout. Again, out of 10 marks, so just making sure that I'm giving enough points per prompt to make sure I'm achieving that 10 out of 10. So the first prompt that I've been asked about is colour. Now, I could say several things about colour in this. What I think is really useful for poster design is that it links quite nicely to expressive studies in that some of the prompts overlap. So things like colour, composition can be very closely linked to poster designs. So, colour. The pale bluey green in the sky creates contrast against the warm orangey red landscape, making the mountain seem like it's advancing towards us and more forward. We see a use of an off-white on the main lettering for the Olympus Mons. This helps prevent the text from going into the background or overpowering the image as well, whilst it harmonises quite nicely with this blue. If it was pure white, it might seem a little bit extreme, but this goes really, really nicely and harmonises with the background. Warm reds and oranges on the mountain help a sense of an otherworldly environment. It almost looks kind of like it could be out of space, or it could be lava or on a different planet. So it kind of feels almost maybe futuristic or something a little bit unusual. The streak of orange and yellow, which we can see beside the capsule, indicate that light's been reflected off it and give kind of an impression that they are in a little glass capsule on here. So those are some things I could say about colour. Again, you can always use your terminology on kind of harmonious colours, complementary colours, if you've got any really hot colours, cold colours, but always just making sure that you're justifying what do those colours do, or what do they help with, in this case, in this design. The second prompt we've been asked about is imagery. So what are we seeing in the poster, and what is it kind of showing to us? In this case, I think there's a real sense of discovery in the picture because the little figures that we see in the capsule are pointing up towards the sky. So the fact that that man is pointing adds a sense of discovery to the poster. So that's to do with imagery. The capsules, these round objects, seem to be suspended from a cable which disappears into the distance. Now this gives a sense of a really vast scale, looking like this is going really, really, really far away into the distance. So makes it feel quite large, almost maybe a little bit intimidating. The sense of scale is also created by these 2 tiny figures that we see in this detailed area. They are much, much smaller than the people in the capsule in the foreground. So this just kind of shows the sheer scale of the mountain that these people are travelling towards and that the tiny people are climbing. It appears that the science fiction appearance of this, the capsule and the bodysuits of the figures, maybe kind of create the idea that they're somewhere else. Maybe they're in outer space, and again adding to this maybe futuristic outer planar experience with this futuristic capsule and the little outfits that the people are wearing. It's not something that you would see day to day. The final thing that we have got to comment on in this picture is layout. Now, layout is very, very similar to kind of how has the poster been composed. So that's what I want you to consider if you ever see the prompt layout. The outline of the mountain and the cable of the capsules point to the main title in the poster. So this really emphasises its importance. So these lines, this line here from the capsules and the mountain, lead us up towards the title, drawing our attention to its importance and what the poster is showing us. The circular form of the capsule is bisected by the angular mountain, which helps to really unify the layout of the poster and leads our eye through the artwork. Because this bit here has been involved with the capsule, it really helps link together the whole thing visually. The simplistic layout with the main image in the lower part of the poster and the title at the top makes it very easy to understand. The text is quite separate from the imagery below, which makes it very easy to read and understand. It's a balanced layout which is created by this diagonal split of the mountain and the sky. And this kind of offset of the sheer size of the capsule in the foreground gives an asymmetrical appearance. Those are the things that I would comment on if I was to discuss this poster in my exam. As long as you're fully justifying each part you're making, you will be awarded the mark. Okay, so that is the only two. I'm going to do those two examples for this video. And as always, if you are doing past papers online or having a look at what's been given in previous years, have a little look at the marking instructions that are linked to it too, because it can give you some really clear ideas of what can be said as answers and what is a good justification. The last piece of advice that I would give you when you're going into this higher art and design paper is making sure that you know where all your revision materials are. I'm imagining your teacher will have put them on Google Classroom, but please ensure that you're aware of what folder they're in, if they're in any assignments, and things like that. If you are unsure of where you can find your materials that you need to revise for the likes of your studied artists or your studied designers, please ask your teacher and they will point you in the right direction. The second point, probably pretty obvious, but please do your revision. Revise, 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 practice, practice, practice. That is what will make you better. You will be doing a lot of practice throughout the school year. However, it is very beneficial to do some in your own time too. Timing yourself on a past paper, even if it's the odd unseen question, just to make sure that you're writing at the right sort of pace. And obviously there is available marking schemes so that you can look through the answers to see what you've written. Also, if you want to ask your teacher to mark a paper that you've maybe done in your own time, they will be more than happy to have a look through that for you to ensure that you're on the right lines. I've already mentioned doing some SQA past papers, which are all available on their website. However, another really useful website is BBC Bitesize if you type in higher art and design, as again, it will just go through the paper and clarify anything that you're maybe not too sure on. But please speak to your teachers. We are here to support you and get you through your exams. Do not be shy. Ask if you're needing any support from them, please. Thank you very much for watching.